Ever wondered what happens when you disappear completely? Not the dramatic exit with slammed doors and final words, but the quiet vanishing act, when you simply stop being available, stop chasing, stop explaining yourself into exhaustion. If they only miss you when you're gone, did they ever really value you at all? This isn't about revenge. This isn't about playing games or manufacturing drama. This is about something far more profound. The moment you stop giving your energy to people who treat it like a renewable resource and start honoring the irreplaceable person you've always been. In this exploration, we're not talking about pulling away gradually or sending mixed signals. We're talking about complete disappearance and the emotional earthquake it creates in those who took your presence for granted. What you're about to understand will shift everything you thought you knew about your own power. The sting of rejection when reality hits. They didn't think you had it in you. After months, maybe years, of being their reliable constant, the one who always answered, always understood, always forgave, they never imagined you'd actually leave. Their ego constructed a comfortable narrative. You needed them more than they needed you. You were the pursuer, the giver, the one who cared too much. They were the prize, the one with options, the one in control. Then you vanished. No long explanation, no final confrontation, no desperate attempt to make them understand your worth. You simply stopped. And in that moment of silence, their entire worldview cracked. This is the emotional whiplash of someone realizing their safety net just disappeared. The person they could always count on to be there, through their moods, their inconsistency, their casual indifference, just walked away without warning. It's not punishment you've delivered, it's revelation. They feel the sting of rejection for the first time, and it burns. They've grown comfortable with your pursuit, your availability, your willingness to accept whatever scraps of attention they offered. Now suddenly, they're faced with the reality that you, the person they took for granted, found them unworthy of your energy. The shock runs deeper than surface ego. It's the terrifying realization that they misread everything. You weren't desperate for their attention. You were generous with your presence. You weren't lucky to have them. They were privileged to know you, and now that privilege has been revoked. The void of missing you, when emptiness becomes tangible. Now that you're gone, their world feels hollow. They thought they could replace you easily. After all, weren't you just one person among many? Weren't they the ones with all the options, all the backup plans, all the people lined up waiting for their attention? They assumed your absence would be barely noticeable, a minor adjustment in their social ecosystem. But nothing fills the void you left behind. They discover that you brought something irreplaceable to their life: emotional weight, genuine warmth, authentic presence. You weren't just another name in their contacts. You were the one who remembered the details they shared in vulnerable moments. You were the one who celebrated their wins without jealousy and offered comfort during their losses without judgment. You were the one who saw through their defenses and loved them anyway. Now, everything feels cold. Conversations with others lack the depth you brought. Interactions feel surface level, performative, empty. They scroll through their phone looking for someone to fill the gap, but everyone else feels like a pale imitation of what you offered freely. This is the consequence of their indifference, not punishment, but natural result. When you treat someone's presence like background noise, you don't notice its value until the silence becomes deafening. They're learning that warmth, once withdrawn, leaves everything around it feeling frozen. The void isn't just about missing your company, It's about missing the version of themselves they were with you. You brought out something in them, perhaps kindness, vulnerability, authenticity, that they can't seem to access with anyone else. In losing you, they've lost a part of themselves they didn't even know they treasured. Overwhelming curiosity, when mystery becomes obsession. Uncertainty becomes their tormentor. Where did you go? Who are you with? What are you doing? Questions that never occupied their mind before now consume their thoughts. When you were always available, always reachable, always eager to share your life with them, they never wondered about your world beyond their immediate view. Your transparency made you predictable. Your consistency made you boring. Now your mystery destroys their false sense of control. They check your social media obsessively, searching for clues about your new life. They analyze your last seen status, decode the timing of your posts, and create elaborate theories about your activities. Every mutual friend becomes a potential source of information. Every casual mention of your name sends their heart racing. Their imagination tortures them more than any words ever could. In your silence, they create 1,000 different stories about where you are and who you're becoming. Are you healing? Are you thriving? Have you found someone who appreciates what they ignored? The not knowing becomes a constant ache, more painful than any argument you ever had. This curiosity isn't romantic. It's the desperate need to regain some sense of control over a situation that has spun entirely beyond their influence. You've become unpredictable, unreachable, unknown. The person they thought they had figured out has revealed layers they never bothered to explore when they had unlimited access. They realize with growing unease that they never really knew you at all. They knew the version of you that showed up for them, patient, giving, accommodating. But who are you when you're not performing emotional labor for their benefit? Who are you when you're not managing their feelings or making excuses for their behavior? This unknown version of you both fascinates and terrifies them. Deep self-reflection, when truth demands attention. This is where the guilt creeps in like rising water. Did I mess up? The question arrives quietly at first, then grows louder until it drowns out everything else. For the first time, they're forced to examine their role in your departure. Without you there to smooth over tensions, explain away their behavior, or provide emotional amnesty for their mistakes, they must face the truth of their actions. They begin replaying conversations with brutal honesty, the times they dismissed your feelings, the occasions they took your kindness for weakness, the moments they prioritized others while expecting you to wait patiently in the background. Every casual cruelty, every thoughtless word, every time they treated your love like an inexhaustible resource, it all comes flooding back. Silence creates space for truth, and they're finally forced to confront their behavior without excuses or distractions. There's no one to minimize their guilt, no one to reassure them that they weren't that bad, no one to help them craft a narrative where they're the victim of misunderstanding rather than the architect of loss. The regret is overwhelming because it's so clear now. They can see the pattern of their behavior with painful clarity, how they took and took and took while giving back just enough to keep you invested, how they kept you in emotional limbo, never quite committing but never quite letting go, how they used your love as a safety net while they explored other options. They remember your face during those moments when you tried to express your needs, how they made you feel demanding for wanting basic respect and consistency. They recall the way you gradually dimmed your light to make them comfortable, how you stopped asking for what you deserved because they made you feel selfish for wanting it. The guilt is crushing because they recognize perhaps for the first time, that they didn't just lose someone who loved them. They lost someone genuinely good, someone rare, someone who saw their flaws and chose to love them anyway, and they repaid that gift with indifference. The urge to pursue you when panic drives action. Now they want you back, hard. The realization of what they've lost ignites a desperate urgency they've never felt before. Suddenly, you're not the one chasing, they are. The power dynamic has completely flipped, and they're experiencing the anxiety, the longing, the desperate need for response that you lived with for so long. They reach out, they try to fix things. Late-night texts filled with apologies and promises, likes on old posts, hoping to remind you of better times. Comments designed to provoke a response, any response, because your silence has become unbearable. They craft messages that swing between anger and pleading, between accusations and admissions of guilt. But you're silent, and that silence speaks louder than anything you could say. Your lack of response isn't cruelty, it's clarity. You've finally understood that words without changed behavior are just noise. You've learned that someone who truly values you wouldn't need to lose you to appreciate you. You've recognized that chasing someone who runs from commitment only leads to your own exhaustion. You are no longer accessible in the way you once were, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you've genuinely moved beyond the need for their validation. Their panic feels foreign to you now, like watching someone desperately search for something you no longer need. They feel the disorienting experience of being on the other side of unrequited effort. Every message they send into your silence echoes back their own voice, hollow and desperate. They're learning what it feels like to care more, to need more, to want someone who has found peace without them. The irony isn't lost on them, or on you. They're finally offering the energy and attention you once craved, but you've grown beyond the person who needed it. Their pursuit has come too late, not because of timing, but because of transformation. You're not the same person who left. You're someone who has remembered their worth. The battle between relief and regret, when freedom feels empty. For a brief moment, they convince themselves they feel free. They tell themselves your absence is liberation, no more emotional complexity, no more guilt about their inconsistency, no more pressure to be better than they were. They can pursue other connections without your expectant eyes watching. They can be selfish without feeling the weight of disappointing someone who deserved better. Then the weight of realization hits like a physical blow. Freedom without meaning is just emptiness with a prettier name. The relief they thought they'd feel transforms into something much heavier, the understanding that they've lost something irreplaceable. Other connections feel shallow by comparison. New attractions lack the depth you brought. Everything else feels like junk food when they've lost their taste for substance. They realize you were never the burden they convinced themselves you were. You were the anchor that kept them grounded, the mirror that reflected their best self, the safe harbor where they could be vulnerable without judgment. In losing you, they haven't gained freedom. They've lost home. This is like drinking salt water when you're dying of thirst. It looks like relief in the moment, the immediate satisfaction of getting something, anything, but it only deepens the underlying need. Every shallow connection they pursue only makes them more aware of what they had and threw away. The regret becomes a constant companion, whispering reminders of what they lost. They see couples showing genuine affection and remember how you looked at them. They hear friends talking about loyalty and remember your unwavering support. They witness real partnership and understand, finally, what you were offering all along. But understanding comes too late. You've already moved beyond the person who needed their recognition. You've learned to give yourself the love you once begged them to provide. Their regret, however genuine, cannot undo the transformation their neglect created. The game begins when manipulation meets indifference. Panic makes them strategic in all the wrong ways. They start playing games, trying to make you jealous with carefully curated posts showcasing their happiness. They upload photos with other people, craft captions designed to suggest they're thriving without you, create an elaborate performance of moving on. They hope to provoke your emotions, to make you feel like you made a mistake in leaving. But you're not watching. You've moved beyond the drama. Their manipulation fails spectacularly because it requires an audience that no longer exists. You've stopped checking their social media. You've unfollowed their digital performance. You've removed yourself so completely from their sphere that their attempts to affect you fall into a void. This is perhaps the most devastating realization for them, that their power to hurt you has evaporated along with your investment in their opinion. The games that once kept you anxiously engaged now play out to empty seats. Their emotional manipulation has lost its target. They discover that playing games requires willing participants, and you've simply left the arena. While they're still strategizing moves in a contest you've forgotten, you're building a life that doesn't revolve around their validation or their rejection. The futility of their efforts becomes clear when mutual friends stop bringing you reports of their activities because you no longer ask, when their indirect messages through others stop reaching you because you've made it clear the conversation is over, when their attempts to triangulate drama fail because you refuse to be drawn into the geometry of their chaos. They're playing chess alone while you've moved on to an entirely different game, one where your worth isn't determined by their attention, where your happiness doesn't depend on their approval, where your peace isn't hostage to their emotional weather. The crushing weight of silence when nothing becomes everything. Your silence becomes unbearable, louder than any argument you ever had. They're accustomed to your responses, your reactions, your willingness to engage even in conflict. Arguments, at least, were interaction. Even your anger was a form of attention. Your tears proved they could affect you. Your frustration showed you still cared enough to fight. But silence. Silence is the absence of care. Silence is indifference made manifest. Silence is the sound of someone who has truly let go. They sit with this silence, and it crushes them. Every text they send disappears into that void. Every attempt at contact meets that same wall of nothing. The silence forces them to hear their own thoughts, to face their own actions, to confront their own emptiness without your voice to fill the space. Let them replay everything they said or didn't say. Let them remember every time they chose someone else, every time they made you wait, every time they treated your love like it would always be there, no matter how carelessly they handled it. Your silence gives them nowhere to hide from the truth of their choices. You used to chase closure, begging for explanations and apologies that would make the pain make sense. Now your silence is the closure. It says everything that needs to be said. You're done. Not angry, not hurt, not waiting for them to change. Done. The weight of this silence teaches them something they never learned when you were available. That absence can be more powerful than presence. That indifference can cut deeper than anger. That the sound of someone walking away can be louder than any words they might have said. They learn to fear silence more than conflict, because conflict at least suggests the possibility of resolution. Silence suggests something far more final, transformation beyond their reach. the fear that brings them. Crawling back when pride becomes worthless. Now they're terrified, genuinely, bone-deep terrified. The realization crystallizes with brutal clarity. They may have lost you forever, not lost your attention or your affection, but lost you. The person who knew their secrets, who understood their dreams, who loved them despite their flaws. The person who made them feel seen and valued and forgiven. The person who created a safe space in a harsh world. Their pride, which once kept them from fully committing to you, becomes worthless in the face of this loss. What good is pride when you're alone with it? What value does emotional superiority have when there's no one around to impress with your detachment? They beg, they plead, they cry, they promise change with a desperation that would have moved you months ago. They offer everything you once asked for: commitment, consistency, genuine attention. They're finally ready to give you what you deserved all along, but it's too late. Not because you're punishing them, but because you're no longer the person who needed those things from them. You've learned to commit to yourself. You've found consistency in your own values. You've given yourself the attention you once craved from them. The person who left was hungry for their love. The person you've become is full from self-respect. Their desperation would have once felt like victory, proof that you mattered, evidence that you were worthy of their full attention. Now it feels foreign, like receiving a passionate letter meant for someone else. You recognize that they're not actually fighting for you. They're fighting against the discomfort of loss, against the bruising of their ego, against the disruption of their comfort. True appreciation doesn't wait for loss to manifest. Real love doesn't require the threat of abandonment to activate. Genuine commitment doesn't need the fear of consequences to sustain it. They're offering you the shadow of what you deserved when you still believed in shadows. Emotional independence. When you return to yourself. You didn't just disappear from them, you returned to yourself. This is the most profound transformation of all. In their absence, you've rediscovered who you are when you're not managing someone else's emotions, when you're not dimming your light to make others comfortable, when you're not contorting yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for your full presence. You see clearly now. The fog of their mixed signals has lifted. The confusion of their inconsistency has cleared. The chaos of their emotional unavailability has settled into calm understanding. You weren't asking for too much. You were accepting too little. You weren't too sensitive. You were responding normally to abnormal treatment. You no longer need their attention because you've learned to give yourself the focus you once begged them to provide. You no longer crave their validation because you've found your worth in your own integrity. You no longer chase their approval because you've approved of yourself. This emotional independence isn't bitter or closed off. It's radiant and open. You're not guarded against love. You're simply selective about where you invest your energy. You haven't become unable to care. You've become unwilling to care for people who don't care for themselves or others. The person they're trying to win back no longer exists. She has evolved into someone who recognizes her value, who honors her boundaries, who chooses peace over chaos and clarity over confusion. She has remembered that love is not supposed to be a struggle, that partnership is not supposed to be one-sided, that being cherished should be a given, not a goal. You let them feel your absence not as punishment, but as consequence. You let them experience their regret, not as revenge, but as education. You let them sit with their choices, not because you're cruel, but because you're no longer willing to protect them from the results of their actions. This is emotional independence, the ability to love without losing yourself, to care without sacrificing your peace, to be open without being available to everyone, to be kind without being convenient. The final truth. When disappearing becomes reappearing. When you disappear from someone else's life, you reappear in your own. Their world may fall apart, but yours finally comes together. The energy you once spent trying to convince them of your worth gets redirected toward living a life that demonstrates it. The time you once invested in decoding their mixed messages gets reinvested in clear communication with people who appreciate directness. The love you once poured into an empty vessel gets offered to those who know how to receive it and give it back. Let them miss you. Let them regret their choices. Let them replay conversations and recognize their mistakes. Let them understand, finally, what they had and how carelessly they handled it. Their emotional education is not your responsibility, but it may be their salvation. You've moved on, and that movement isn't away from love. It's toward a love that matches your energy, appreciates your consistency, and honors your presence. You've moved beyond people who need to lose you to value you, toward people who treasure you while they have you. This isn't about making them pay for their mistakes. This is about refusing to pay for their mistakes any longer. This isn't about punishing them for their choices. This is about rewarding yourself for finally making better ones. When you disappear from the wrong people, you become visible to the right ones. When you stop being available to those who took you for granted, you become accessible to those who will cherish your accessibility. When you exit relationships that diminished you, you create space for connections that celebrate you. Your disappearance wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Not the beginning of their regret, though that may follow, but the beginning of your recognition that you were never meant to beg for the love you deserve. You were meant to command it through your presence, inspire it through your authenticity, and maintain it through mutual respect and genuine care. Let them feel the weight of your absence. Let them learn from the silence you've created. Let them understand that some doors, once closed, don't reopen, not because you're unforgiving, but because you've found better rooms to occupy. Your power was never in making them want you. Your power was always in knowing you're worth wanting. And finally, beautifully, you've remembered that truth. Now you know what really happens when you vanish. You don't just disappear from their life. You reappear in your own, more radiant than ever before.